The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. On today's program, we're continuing our series of interviews with all 6 candidates running in the 2 Nanaimo ridings in this provincial election. Today, we'll hear from Nanaimo-Gabriola NDP candidate Sheila Malcolmson and Nanaimo-Lantzville NDP candidate George Anderson.
Hi, I'm Sheila Malcolmson. I am Nanaimo-Gabriola's BC NDP candidate. I've been really lucky to be representing the community in the BC legislature since 2019. And before that as Member of Parliament, and before that as elected Island Trustee on Gabriola and Chair of Islands Trust Council for the whole Islands Trust area. And all of those roles, super grateful to learn from community. Everything that happens on the ground directly affects the work that I do, and I'm really grateful to be here.
And it is a new riding you're running in, although you're already have been the MLA for Nanaimo in the past. What would you identify as maybe the big priorities in our region for the next cycle of government?
Everything I hear on doorsteps all summer long, all this 2 months of the campaign. Number one, healthcare, but really very closely related is affordability, and housing is mixed in with that. I wish I was hearing more about climate change and protecting wild salmon and reconciliation. At the same time, I really recognize that once we have people's real core basic needs looked after and people don't feel so under pressure, then it makes it possible for them to, think more broadly and think long term. And so as a BC NDP government, we've been doing that work all the way along. Climate change and reconciliation is built into everything we do while we're building back up the healthcare system, while we're tackling homelessness, while we're investing more in public safety, while we're building up healthcare in every way. So those feel like the top pieces, healthcare and affordability. What
are you going to do or planning to do, maybe change, do differently, continue doing on those fronts of healthcare and affordability?
Yeah. We were in such a hole when we came into government in 2017, a decade and a half of underinvestment in affordable housing, deregulation of the Addiction Treatment Center, the largest layoff in Canada of healthcare workers, 9,000 healthcare workers laid off by the Gordon Campbell, Christy Clark, John Ristad's old team. And then hit by the pandemic. So although we've brought so many new services in like that, now we have a new intensive care unit at the hospital. Now we have MRI, 2 of them, machines that run 24 hours and get people diagnosed. Now that we have the most nurse practitioners of anywhere in the country, we started with the worst. We've connected 400,000 people with family doctors across BC. Opened 1,000 units of affordable housing here in town. All these numbers don't mean anything if you don't have a family doctor or if you're seeing homelessness on the street. We've just got so much more work to do. So I would say a lot of starting to see results from a lot of those investments in healthcare, in housing. We've learned along the way. There's some more deep dives that we have taken. One example is how we find the right fit of housing for someone who has been living unhoused for a long time. We used to move them right into a place and think that's all they need. We've learned that the steps and the kind of small steps to be able to get people into a place that they're housed. So now we're pulling directly from shelter beds, not people directly from the streets when we move people into housing, for example. Healthcare, now that we've got a lot more people connected with primary care practitioners, what can we do on the preventative side? What can we do on dispatching the other medical kind of team members that are out there? Now pharmacists can prescribe simple, antibiotics or birth control pills. In our platform, we say we're going to do the same kind of thing with midwives. They can, our picture is that they'll be able to prescribe birth control, insert IUDs, things like that, like how to broaden based on what we've learned. And now we've got a little bit more of a foundation. For example, building the hospital tower in Nanaimo, that wouldn't have been possible in year 1, but now we are in year 7 of our mandate. And almost finished building the hospital in Cowichan and 29 other hospital projects all around the province. Deeper investment in Nanaimo on top of the $700 million we've already invested in the hospital. But like all of it feels like that rising tide effect. We've added tons of resources, but the need is still really deep, so we need to do more.
What would you say to people who hear all of that and think, well, I don't know, it feels like the cost of me affording housing is so much more than it was 5-7 years ago. There seem to be more ER closures across the province than in years past. What would you say to people who would raise concerns about that?
Yeah, it's such a fair comment. And, saying this is being felt by every place in North America, or to say that we have a public safety and a toxic drug crisis in Alaska and Alberta and Washington and Oregon, red and blue states and provinces, we all have the challenge. That doesn't make anybody feel any better. Like, you're in good company. Like, that's no comfort, right? I think when I, say to people, we were in a hole when we started of underinvestment and layoffs of healthcare workers. We've been building that back up. When we say the impacts of the pandemic are still being felt, when we say global inflation has affected everybody and the cost of groceries, those are all true things. But again, it doesn't, like, we're not making excuses, right? We just are saying we need to deepen the investment. This is not a time for cuts. This is what the Ristad Conservatives are offering. They say they're going to cut healthcare. We believe them because they did it before. They'll do it again. And so that's the offer to say, you're right, the investments haven't been enough. The outcomes haven't been enough. There aren't yet enough affordable housing units. There aren't yet enough healthcare workers, but there are a lot more than when we started. We're on the right track. We need to carry on. And we're really grateful to the people that are holding the system together, in healthcare and education and frontline policing and paramedics that are just working under incredibly difficult conditions. We're just trying to give them that hope that reinforcements are coming with every new graduate that we're funding, adding more beds at the or seats for training at the universities, helping people pay tuition, doing everything we can to get more people in those healthcare and public safety roles, giving people that hope that things are getting better. We're taking steps, but there's a lot more for us to do, and we're the party with the momentum and the commitment to do it.
Are there any issues or situations hyper-specific to Nanaimo or maybe even the Nanaimo-Gabriola riding that you would advocate for as a member of the Legislative Assembly? Yeah.
I think I'm the only MLA that lives on a Gulf Island, and I take the ferry, pretty much every day. And that key piece of our transportation network was so undermined during the Gordon Campbell, Christy Clark time. They said they wanted ferry fares to be user pay, and that had huge impacts on people, not just people that live on Gulf Islands, but anybody traveling, so that we were able to roll back rates when we very first came in, and we've kept them low, that we returned the seniors discount. That's the kind of thing that I can especially advocate for, and that affects a whole lot of British Columbians, but I feel like I've got kind of a unique seat there. But I would say kind of more broadly, because Nanaimo was hit early and hard by the overdose crisis, because as a port city, we've always had a lot of people moving through, because of the presence of the Hells Angels here, some of the public safety and organized crime elements that are different from downtown Vancouver and Surrey. I've been a real voice in government, and early on with John Horgan really ringing the alarm on some of the street disorder and public safety concerns that everybody agrees are unacceptable. That I've been on every one of the cabinet committees that has been like a cross-government implementing solutions and bringing more resources to bear. And so that's, of course, so important to people in Nanaimo. I hear this so often. People just tell me on the doorsteps, so many nights when I'm out canvassing, that people living unhoused are just so upsetting because they know it could happen to anybody. It's
What are the solutions then on all of those committees you're on? Mm-hmm. What are the specific solutions you're pushing for and hoping to see? Yeah, so we've been really trying to break silos between different ministries: public safety, mental health and addictions, housing, and then my ministry, social development and poverty reduction. And so the community safety plan that David Eby tabled
right after the day after he was sworn in as premier, and then announced a lot of it in Nanaimo in front of the courthouse April of last year. We're seeing in Nanaimo, although it still feels hard and there's still more for us to do, every measure of crime in Nanaimo between 2022 and 2023 has decreased. And partly that's because we've established dedicated teams to identify repeat violent offenders so that when there's a shoplifting incident, one day and maybe another the next that might itself not trigger a big police response, when there are people that have been identified as repeat offenders, those folks are now in jail or else in treatment or else really closely watched. And the cooperation between police, between the probation officer, between Crown Counsel is focusing resources on preventing further incidents of crime for those people. Not perfect yet. There are still bad situations that happen, and that's not acceptable. For us, having rebuilt the jail during this term of office is going to bring a new kind of connection between policing and who's able to be both in remand, in custody while they're awaiting trial, or else incarcerated. And then what kind of supports are they getting when they exit prison? We've already doubled the community transition teams to make sure that people on their way out of jail have got a place to stay, connections to treatment, making sure that they have a better path on the other side, given that they're going to be literally a captive audience for a period of time. So those are on those pieces, a targeted task force that's focused on criminal activity that resulted in us seizing the Hells Angels clubhouse here in Nanaimo, and really focusing on as enforcement on crime in Lower Mainland pushes people out to Vancouver Island, that we've got a dedicated team for the whole island that's making sure that criminal activity doesn't move to the island. All of those pieces are interconnected. And then, of course, the whole treatment side. We've got 50 addiction treatment beds that you can access in Nanaimo now with your healthcare card. There were 0 when we started, but we need to have a lot more because those are always full. And especially bringing in what we've learned through the Road to Recovery program at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, that someone who's in hospital with a overdose, repeated overdose, or some kind of substance use emergency, that we can walk them across the hall directly to detox with no waiting, and then from detox directly into treatment, all under one roof, so that there just isn't that opportunity for people to slip between the cracks or relapse in between the phases of treatment. All of those pieces are for Nanaimo and Vancouver Island are ahead of us, that seamless path through treatment and recovery, but we've proved it at St. Paul's over the last 10 months, and really excited to see that expand here, because I hear again and again, I see again and again, that's what people need.
Sheila Malcolmson, I'd love to keep the conversation going, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming into the studio.
Thanks, CHLY, for the opportunity.
Nanaimo-Gabriola NDP candidate Sheila Malcolmson. Next on the show, we'll hear from Nanaimo-Lantzville NDP candidate George Anderson.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. Support and grow our nonprofit newsroom project today at chly.ca/donate with a monthly or one-time donation. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
My name is George Anderson. I am the BC NDP candidate for Nanaimo-Lantzville.
Well, thank you very much for coming on down to the studio. First of all, maybe what would you like people in Nanaimo to know about you? How would you introduce yourself to someone in the riding?
Well, I was born and raised in Nanaimo. I was on City Council in the Regional District from 2011 to 2014. I'm the past president of Literacy Central Vancouver Island, and I'm currently the chair of the Board of Governors at Vancouver Island University. A longtime resident and someone who has a great passion for seeing Nanaimo realize its potential.
And what made you decide to put your name forward and be a candidate for the NDP party in this election?
Well, when I ran for council many years ago, I wanted to give people a voice at the table who historically had not been part of the decision-making process. And when back in 2023, a number of people came to me and said, we'd really like you to consider running. And when I looked at the parties that were running, it was the BC NDP that was focused on helping people and taking action for people, whether it's the 800 family doctors that have been hired this year alone, a new medical school being built in Surrey, which is the first in 50 years in Western Canada. And here in Nanaimo, a new intensive care unit that is being built or has been built, a new high acuity unit, BC Cancer Centre that's opening in 2028, and long-term care facility. Like, these are the type of things that will be making generational change. And that's the type of government that I want to be a part of, a government that's focused on making sure life is better for every British Columbian.
What are maybe some of the specific issues you feel are most important to Nanaimo and our area in this election campaign?
Well, I'm going and knocking at a lot of doors and talking to people, and the predominant issue that I'm hearing is about healthcare. And that's what this BC NDP government is focused on. There's a new urgent and primary care facility going in right behind Country Club Mall. There's a new long-term care facility in Lantzville with 300 beds. This is going to alleviate a lot of the pressures at NRGH. And I had a town hall with David Eby just a couple weeks ago, and we were able to announce a new patient tower. Like, that's going to be transformational for our region, and it's going to be great.
Beyond healthcare, what do you think are some of the other issues you'd like to highlight or take specific action on?
Absolutely. I'd say affordability is another one of those areas. Things are challenging out there. High interest rates, global inflation, like, this is challenging throughout the region. And so this NDP government's focused on getting rid of interest on student loans to help students. We've created rebates for BC Hydro to reduce that by $500. Similarly with ICBC, people have seen their rates come down. And so this is more of what this NDP government is focused on doing, which is trying to make life better for the everyday British Columbian. And so we talked about for young people who want to be first-time home buyers by having the government pay for 40% of the mortgage, as well as giving every British Columbian a $1,000 tax cut. So that's going to help make things a bit more affordable for everyday British Columbians.
If there are everyday British Columbians out there who take a look around and say, well, compared to a decade ago, the price of housing is far more than it used to be. I'm hearing about all kinds of ER closures across the province in a way that I never used to. What would your response to some of those sentiments be?
Well, if we were to look more than a decade ago, that I was a high school student in the early 2000s when the BC Liberals and John Ristad were in government, and they cut healthcare, they cut education. And the reason that we're in the place we are right now is because they weren't investing it in the way that the BC NDP is doing right now. So if we want to go to a place where there are further cuts, that's what the BC Conservatives are going to do. And they've actually stated that they're going to cut $4.1 billion from healthcare. So how do we get to a place where people have access to quality healthcare? It's through what this government's doing, which is hiring more family doctors, hiring more nurses. And we've actually had nurses come out and say they support what this government is doing. And that's what we're continuing to be focused on, is making sure that we have more people within our healthcare system so that they have access to healthcare when they need it.
Are there any issues or situations specific to Nanaimo that you feel like if you were elected that you would bring to your party, bring to the party's attention and advocate for?
Well, and I'm when I was on council, I advocated a lot for transportation. I advocated for making sure that we had rail, that we ensured that we protected our environment, and that's what this NDP government's been doing. Has been sure we believe in climate change, whereas the BC Conservatives, their leader, said, how did we convince carbon-based beings that carbon is the problem with climate change? So for me, I would be working to make sure that we get that new patient tower as soon as possible, that we make sure that young people are participating in our democracy, and that seniors can live with dignity. And that's what we're already doing. So I'd be a great advocate in the way that I have been in the past as a city councillor.
You mentioned climate action. What are some of the specific measures the BC NDP would take? David Eby has said, for example, if he was no longer required to have the carbon tax by the federal government, that he would get rid of it as well.
So when it comes to the carbon tax, if the federal government gets rid of it, we would get rid of the consumer portion, because there are people who are having challenges with affordability. And that's why we've expanded more spaces with $10 a day childcare. We've taken additional credits to make sure that hydro is more affordable for people. This is what we're doing to make sure that people can live the lives that they need to, because it is challenging out there. Global inflation, it's a challenge. And so that's what this government's focused on, is making sure that people can have the type of services that they need. We've done more with respect to transit-oriented zones, so people can walk to the grocery store. We're actually talking about building 300,000 more homes over the next 10 years. That's going to help everyday people be able to get to work. And also it's going to help small businesses as well, who are having challenges finding workers. So that's what this NDP government is focused on, is people.
Are there any issues that you feel like are very important, but you feel like they haven't necessarily gotten that much oxygen in the campaign so far?
I think, again, the biggest priority that I've heard at the doorstep is healthcare. And I know a number of people who are saying that they don't have access to a family doctor. And that's what we've been focused on by opening more urgent and primary care facilities, also opening more affordable housing. There's been over 900 projects in Nanaimo alone. And also when it comes to mental health as well, we've opened 10 new beds at Edgewood, which is world-renowned facility. This is how we're going to make sure that we make sure the foundation of our healthcare system is strong for everyone.
Is there anything that maybe you would be, as a government, focused on doing differently? Any changes if you were to receive another term in office? And I know you're coming into this as potentially a new MLA.
Well, what I would do is, I think it's really important to go out and speak with our Chamber of Commerce, speak with our local businesses, speak with mayor and council. As you know, I'm a former city councillor, so I think it's really important to talk to people in the community. But right now, we need to be laser focused on making sure that people have access to healthcare, that they are able to deal with the affordability crisis that exists right now. But that isn't going to be solved by having the BC Conservatives who are talking about cutting healthcare, they're talking about cutting education. And also, even scarier is the fact that John Ristad, the leader of the BC Conservatives, said that he wouldn't enforce federal gun laws. That means not having safer communities. Like, we need to have a premier who's focused on ensuring that there's safety in our communities. By not enforcing federal gun laws, that means we will have the same type of system that exists in the United States, where people will have 3D printed guns, semi-automatic rifles. And this government has actually taken on organized crime. The Hells Angels building that existed on Old Victoria Road, it was this government that took on the Hells Angels and then demolished that building. So this is what this government's focus on, is making sure that we continue to be doing what's in the best interest of British Columbians every single day. And that's what I expect will continue to happen should we end up with another mandate for the next 4 years.
Beyond the seizure of the Hells Angels Clubhouse, on maybe more broadly the issue of community safety, concerns about community safety, what would you say to voters who are worried about that particular issue?
No, I can definitely feel for them. My sister, she's talked about how she doesn't feel safe walking downtown Nanaimo, but one of the things this government's done, they've hired 250 police officers. We've expanded Brennan Lake, and we're also talking about the fact that there are challenges with people dealing with traumatic brain injuries who might need to have involuntary care. So we're talking about these secure care facilities. There's going to be one that's opening in Maple Ridge to be able to deal with these issues, because, you know, these are people's moms, dads, brothers, and sisters, and they also need help. And so that's what this government's focused on. This government's so focused on making sure that every British Columbian is treated fairly.
When it comes to the idea of involuntary care, some advocates have raised concerns that for people who are looking to access, say, for example, voluntary addiction treatment, that when it comes time to do that, they are met with a long wait list. How does that kind of fit together with this idea of we'll suddenly be able to create involuntary care when we don't have enough care for the people who are seeking it?
So if I might let you know, which it was the BC Liberal government in 2012, along with John Ristad, who closed Riverview back in 2012. Where do you think all of those individuals went? They went right out onto the streets. And it was this government in 2021 that partially reopened Riverview. We've been focused on building a system that had been clawed back significantly by people like John Ristad. In 2012, John Ristad's government was told that the intensive care unit in Nanaimo was the worst in Canada. And what did they do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And then when this BC NDP government came in, they said, we're going to fix it. And then it was fixed. So again, there are challenges, but this government is focused on making sure that we provide solutions and provide them in a timely manner, not just say that, sorry, we're going to cut them and then let people fend for themselves.
Is there anything else you'd like to highlight to people in Nanaimo about your candidacy or anything to do with the upcoming election?
Well, all I would tell people, this is a very important election, and we're talking about generational change. And this is what this government is focused on, is making sure that we're helping people. I have dedicated the majority of my life to making sure Nanaimo realizes its potential, whether it was through the 40-year transportation master planning process that I was part of, or whether it was through an electronic town hall, to make sure that young people and parents and individuals who couldn't make it into council meetings could have a voice. And that's what David Eby is doing every day, is working for their for other people's families, their neighbors, their friends. He's focused on people, and that's what this BC NDP government's focused on. So I'd hope that people will go and look at my record of action and look at what this NDP government's record of action is, and make sure that they go out and vote in the advance polls and talk to their friends, because this is a very important election.
George Anderson, thank you very much for coming on down to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Nanaimo-Lantzville NDP candidate George Anderson. Next Wednesday, we'll wrap up our series of interviews with all 6 candidates across the 2 Nanaimo ridings in the upcoming provincial election. You can find more information on what riding you're in and where you can vote online at elections.bc.ca. Election Day is Saturday, October 19th. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter online at chly.ca/subscribe. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.